everybody. Welcome to Nerd Out. I'm Alexander Gasson, your host for today. It's a show where I get to sit down with some amazing people and talk about things that they love for no other reason than I like it. Today, my guest is Dan Dillon.
Hi.
Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm fantastic. I'm at Gen Con and I'm having a wonderful time.
This is my first time, so it's been a little...
There's a lot of people who I love who are here and it's their first time. I'm so happy.
Yeah, I mean, Gen Con wasn't even on my radar for like a while. But D&D wasn't really on my radar until January of last year.
Oh, wow. So newcomer to the whole
thing, and I just decided to jump into the deepest part of the ocean and just stay there.
The internet, yes.
It's been nice. It's been nice.
Good.
So speaking of D&D, what are we going to nerd out about today?
Oh, I don't know. I figured we could talk about how tastes can differ so much from one table to another or from one player to another at the same table, and that's okay. And ways that you can find what you enjoy and how to reach your players or just find your right people that you want to play with.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, that's when I first got on the stream, that was the second time I'd ever played, the second character I ever made, but it was the third time I ever played. And
oh, wow.
At that point, that was my third DM. And so I had just the smallest of tastes of just how drastically different it can be at the table. And I mean, Eugenio stinking spoiled me, so I don't really know what I'm going to do with my life moving forward.
I know, I'm telling you.
but talk to me. So you're talking about how it differs from table to table. What do you mean?
Well, there are different play styles that are inherent in a role-playing game, and we can kind of focus on D&D, I suppose. Like, there's people who love to kick in the door and move minis around a map, and they almost tactical board game style it, and they're there to fight monsters and get treasure and collect XP and see what's behind the next door. Mm-hmm. And that's just how they do. And if that's how the group likes to play, that's great. Then there's your other players who are maybe more social butterflies. They're more into diving into the depths of what makes their character tick and figuring out what makes another character tick and how they can make those ticks sync up, and they live for when they don't, and you get the conflict that arises from that.
So much
it's
fun.
A very different style than somebody who's there for the tactical combat play. And it can be tricky because if you have a DM who prefers one over the other, then you're likely to see a lot more of that sort of game. Mm-hmm. And you can, if you're not careful, leave some of your players behind. And they'll just be left playing on their phones while initiative is rolling and they're pining about the NPC they want to, delve into.
Wow. We're going to go there. Mm-hmm. The NPC they want to delve into.
However you care to take that.
Okay. But I guess probably with that, it's like not being afraid to find a group that fits you. Right. If it's a square peg and like the roundest of holes, mm-hmm. don't be afraid to find like a better peg.
Yeah.
Because communication is key in D&D, and communicating with your players as a DM or communicating with your fellow players as a player, and finding out what they're comfortable with or what they're wanting to gain from that, and make sure that they're able to find that.
Absolutely. That's why the concept of the session zero, like people like to throw it around these days, is so important. So you can get some of those expectations out in the open up front, mm-hmm. and so you can figure out, all right, are we on the same page? Are we not? But are people willing to flex here and there and try it? Because I prefer a bit of a mix, because I enjoy intense, dangerous combats. I also love deep, immersive character motivations and everything that can come out, all the drama that can come out of that. It's delicious. But, yes. Too much of one, too much of the other, not really my thing. So once you talk to your players, communication being key, as you said, figure out what everybody wants to do. Make sure the DM is comfortable running that. Comfort and, feeling safe and able to express the sorts of things you want to in the game, right. Also huge. So talking to your players, to each other, to your DM, before you even start a campaign, really can't recommend that highly enough. That's crucial.
Absolutely. I have a home game and I love my home game, mm-hmm. But it's the same thing where we hadn't played together and we knew each other and we were friends. But when we sat down at the table, we were finding out different things that we wanted from this. Mm-hmm. Me being the dramatic person that I am, and so very ingrained with this 11-page backstory I just wrote for my character.
Right.
Was really starving for that RP. But friends of mine who love that kind of battle and that kind of progression was also wanting that. And I really respect our DM for finding that happy middle ground where we're pushing the storyline forward, we're building those connections with each other, and these people are just coming more and more out of their shells, and it's been really beautiful to see.
That's awesome.
But I've also been in groups where it was just like loot grinding.
Right.
And it was just, okay, cool, let's kill this guy. What did I get? And that is cool. Go for it. Acquire wealth. But for me, it was like, I was like, but like, are we friends though?
Right. It's important to, and one of the biggest things with bringing new people into the game is they have no idea what their preference is, you know, and the wrong sort of tone for what really gets them interested and engaged, that can turn away a prospective new player from the game entirely. I mean, I've spoken to people who said, well, I played once and it was awful, and blah, 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 and someone talked me into grudgingly trying it 3 years later, and now I love it, and I'm running a stream, and you know, all of that. So it's important as DMs and people running a game to be aware of that when you're bringing in new people. Try not to overload them all at once. You know, do have conversations about, you know, like what sorts of other media do they like? That can tell you a lot about the sort of stories they'll engage with. Do they prefer nonstop explosion action movie? Do they prefer slow burn dramas? You know, that'll help you tailor it and give them kind of a touchstone to understand what you're talking about when you mention dungeon crawl, because that means nothing to someone who's never played D&D before.
Right.
And then beyond that is there are so many other games. So many other games out there that do different things well, and hit different notes than Dungeons and Dragons does. And you can reskin it to your heart's content, but it never is quite the same as a system that's built to do something else that D&D isn't. And so don't be afraid to branch out and try other games. D&D is my first and best love, but there are other games out there that I am equally passionate about. And
yeah,
you know,
I've been able to experience a couple of them. Being with Variant Roles and with Dan Gasson, I've been introduced to 2 different games. Blades in the Dark, which was so much fun.
I'm so interested in that, but I've never been able to play.
It's Blades in the Dark. It feels more. It doesn't really have so much to do with stats. I feel like it's more story driven than even 5e is.
Cool.
And so it's talking about like figuring out in game what you're gonna happen, and then you can do like flashbacks and be like, oh well, we're in this situation, but wait, I'm gonna flashback and say that I put like a gun under this table.
Right, so you kind of go back to that heist planning voiceover that's happening while the action is going through.
And then we go, whoop, okay, I reach under the table,
grab the gun,
and it's just kind of always changing, always evolving, and it was fun, and you got to have a lot of fun with the players, and it relied very heavily on what you can come up with on the spot.
Cool.
And for someone like me, and I almost feel like probably you would really enjoy it as well. And then the other one I got to play was Cypher, and where I got to play like an AI and just was pulling from, you know, my 90s childhood with
Cool.
The Matrix. And I was like, yeah, of course I'm going to come up with somebody who's got the plugs from the, you know, embryonic womb.
Right.
You know, flirting with the AI that Dan was playing, you know. Come on, baby, open the doors for me, please.
That's how you hack it?
Yep, absolutely. I was just literally flirting with doors to open
Flirting
for the
with the
elevators to
computers.
work. And it's interesting just to see what kind of different styles come out in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just games can focus on so many different tones, and there's so many independent games nowadays that are laser focused on the type of story they're going to tell. Like you want to, what is it called? I think it was called Reflections. It was about 2 samurai who are in a duel, and they're in that calm moment where they're kind of sizing each other up before they're about to strike with their blades, and one or both are going to die. And then you kind of play back to see how they got to that point where they're in this 1-strike duel to the death. And it's very short. It's like half hour to an hour of play, and it's got kind of a structure to help you play through this backstory. It sounds super fascinating.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean,
I hope I'm getting the names right. I think it's
mean,
Reflections.
We'll just get sued about it later. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
I mean, especially since we're at Gen Con. You know, we're going around and we're seeing all these amazing games that people have taken the time to build. I got stopped, or actually I stopped myself because I saw a Big Trouble in Little China board game.
Oh yeah.
And RPG game, and was just over the moon about it. And it's we visited the Invisible Sun table and everything. And I guess I don't know if there's ever going to come a time where I'm not just completely amazed by the bounds of imagination and creativity that people have. Right. It just seems to be an unending pool.
You think about how many stories we tell and how many different media and how many different ways within a certain medium you can just take that and put a little bit of system and structure to it, and now you've got yourself a game.
Yeah.
And it can be simple, it can be complex, it can, I'm a big proponent of storytelling. It's therapeutic, it helps us grow, it helps us understand each other. So many positive things. Stress relieving, helps people cope with mental illness and so many other different challenges. It's really astounding to me what this very simple thing can grow into.
Yeah, and speaking of little simple things, so you and I talked a little bit, and you really like maybe some game mechanics that aren't super popular.
Sure.
Like rations?
Yeah, like when I DM, I like to make sure that my players know how much stuff they're carrying, because I do that little thing called encumbrance, where if you're carrying too much, it starts to screw you up and slow you down, and you might have trouble climbing that crumbly rock wall because you have 70,000 pounds of gold on your back, so you slow the dragon. How are you going to move this cavern full of heavy, heavy gold treasure all the way back down the mountain? What's your plan for that? In fact, one of the most fun sessions I had from my most beloved D&D campaign, the entire session was planning how to get across the desert in the middle of summer and back from the ancient tomb they discovered and somehow not die. And so it focused around, first of all, finding the ancient tomb. They used maps, they used magical directions to triangulate where it was, because there was this artifact they were seeking there that they had a compass that would point to, essentially. And then dealing with the sages who knew, the cartographers, making the deals to get the maps, figuring all of that out. And then, okay, this is going to take us, a week and a half there, best case scenario, a week and a half back.
Right.
How are we going to carry enough water to not be dried husks out in the middle of the anvil?
No clerics?
No. Well, so this was 3rd edition, and those spell slots were very precious because it was a 3rd level spell to create water, not a 1st level spell like 5th edition. So the whole thing came down to how much water do we need versus how much water can we carry, and water is very heavy, turns out. And so they're trying to figure this out, and they came up with, we could use pack animals. That'll help us carry plenty, but pack animals need to drink to live, so now they need to carry more water, and they're trying to find that balance point where they can actually make it happen. And my players coined that phrase, the tyranny of mules, which comes from the tyranny of fuel from rocketry, because you need so much fuel to get into orbit, but fuel's heavy, which means you need more fuel, and
But I like little aspects of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I tried to pull some of that into my home game because I have a character that loves books. And I will always ask the DM, I'm like, I would like to take this book. Where am I at right now? Because I think I have 4 other books plus everything else that I have.
Oh.
And because I understand that these things weigh down. And there's so much great RP and story progression that you can have just from these taking in these little things. And even sometimes, it could help you with everyday life. We're going on a road trip and we have, a Ford Fiesta. And so how much snacks can we put in it? Yeah, can we live off of just Twizzlers?
How can we Tetris enough jerky into this thing to make it?
Exactly. And so that's fascinating. We've had that where we try to plan things, and even if you're trying to plan combat, where it's we're trying to take real world, scenarios and put it in, let's build a phalanx and let's do all this.
Right.
So or they're backdoors, and sometimes you can, it helps the DM come up with little tricks for you too. So that stuff like that sounds awesome.
It is. It can become too much if you're not careful, because you don't want to get into the minutia of every little, all right, where's this dagger? Where you carry that? Where's your other dagger? Oh, but you said this was in the other. That's too much. Don't do that. But injecting just enough realism to help it feel more real. Like if you've ever been in the heat, you know how oppressive it can be. You got to carry water. You can use that to kind of help draw your players into the moment and figure out the danger of, okay, making this trick is going to be perilous, even if we don't fight sand monsters, right? Even if just going there and back, the heat will kill us. And it can help just kind of enhance that mood. It can help create new tension and new conflict for you, because like, oh, well, the raiders come out and they go straight for your water casks and they're swinging axes. And so now that creates a tension point for you to have to...
I was about to ask if you entered in scenarios that would... Because they're planning this like it's all hunky dory. You know, we've got our stuff, we've got our our mules, we're heading out. Do you create these kind of encounters that they have the possibility of losing these resources?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, everything about creating encounters, whether it's combat or intrigue or social interaction, whatever, it's all about finding pressure points where you can hurt them. You just gotta. It sounds a little weird, but you have to know what will make them react, and if they know how deadly the environment is, or if they know that they need this wagon to haul all this treasure that they need to buy out the evil baron or whatever they're doing. And if the bandits attack the wagon, there's no way they're going to get enough treasure they need back to save the town. Right. So that just creates another avenue of tension and conflict that you can create.
And some strategic thinking out of that as well. I mean, one of my favorite things is somebody trying to put Dungeons and Dragons on a resume and essentially rephrasing it like weekly strategy and
team building.
Yep. And just using that, and like, God forbid you're ever sitting in an interview and they're like, well, do you know how many camels you would need to get water across?
Turns out, yes.
It turns out I've done the math, and the answer is how many bandits are coming out.
Well, and then the other thing about that is when you have those different ways to kind of come at them as an encounter builder, that allows them this whole new range of creative possibilities to figure out solutions. Like, you need to get your pack horses across this ravine and the bridge is out. So how are you going to do it? I've seen some crazy MacGyver schemes when then the magic gets thrown into the mix. Well, we'll turn this horse gaseous and we'll just lead it across as a cloud. And this one will reduce to the size of a chihuahua and I'll just put it in the bag. And, just seeing what people come up with to overcome these things, especially when it's nothing I ever thought of. Like, oh my God, I forgot they had that potion or whatever. And they're okay. Just seeing them dodge the rocks that I try to throw, ways that I never anticipate. And when you have different ways to come at them, they have more opportunities to thwart you.
Don't you just get so proud?
I love it.
And it's just, I feel like maybe that happened a little bit in Ravnica, where I was trying my hardest to try and figure out like the components of what could be an explosive. And like trying to think out of the box to do everything I could to locate this, to try and figure out where it would come from. And it was just, you get to think about stuff that you don't get to think about very often. I mean, I don't think a lot of us are thinking about going across the desert for 9 days there and 9 days back, or thinking about, how to properly infiltrate a building. I mean, I do.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't? And so it kind of is just, it's like a break and like a fun release from like everyday life where, it depends on what job you have.
Yeah, of course.
Me in school, I don't want to do it at all. I'd rather be thinking about how to thwart bandits.
Yeah, absolutely. Escapism is not to be underrated.
No, absolutely. And so we have like the little things and the encumbrance. Like, what are some other little game mechanics that you like to throw in?
Oh, geez. Well, a lot of it is just stuff that's already there that I notice a lot of people sort of gloss over and ignore, like material components for spells in D&D. I love material components. And I also love that 5th edition helps you one of my favorite things about Fifth, and this design is brilliant, I
Right.
think, is the system is so good at getting out of your way when you need it to. So you have these options where you can use a spellcasting focus. So you don't have to have your Eye of Newt, your Bat Guano, your Pinch of Rabbit Fur, blah, 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 blah. But if for the player who wants to do those, who wants to get descriptive with their spells, it's there, right? So you can have, why just the other day, or just this morning, we had someone flipping a penny for their target's thoughts by flicking a copper piece at them, because a copper piece is the material component for detect thoughts. So he would flick it at his target, and it would kind of stick to their forehead and then pull the thoughts out.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
so that just adds a flair to that magic that wasn't there before. Or to use, kind of a ridiculously popular example, Liam's character Caleb Widowgast on Critical Role. He is very meticulous about describing how he uses like the sulfur in his hand and then drawing a line through it to create Wall of Fire. That's drawing from so many mystic traditions of sympathy and contagion and all of these things that are real world magical and mystical principles, and then injecting them into the game, and that helps paint the picture of who this character is.
And that causes, and like we were going back, because we keep going back on this. It creates such a powerful RP. Like one of the things that, if we're going to touch on this, because the way Liam plays a wizard is just goals. When he was creating a transmuter stone.
Yeah.
This guy was leading up to that for episodes. I'm going to go find a lucky rock, and I'm going to carry this rock, and then I'm going to touch this rock. And then suddenly you're like, oh, shit.
This is why.
This is why.
Yep.
And now he's doing something again, and we're all like paying just a little bit of attention.
Right.
And some of I love the ways that people describe how they do their spells, because if they have the spell component, maybe they can throw a little bit of their
Absolutely.
own pizzazz on it. And we have our home game, and one of the favorite things that I love that DMs tend to ask is, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What does that look like? I got the chance to play a cleric once, and because I'm a little extra, I wanted to play a werewolf cleric because reasons. I've always wanted to be one.
Okay.
And so I wanted to cast Greater Restoration. And the DM asked me, what does that look like? And so I had the component, but for me it was more of an emotional connection. And so I had my character partially transform and touch their head to the character who was needing restoration.
Like a little head bunt, yeah.
Like that you see dogs do when they're trying to be gentle or helpful. And it was so good I got an inspiration point.
That's great.
But it's like little points like that you wouldn't get if you didn't read the spell or look at it.
Right. And if these things are getting in your way as a DM or as a player, absolutely, brush them off, shuffle them off to the side, gloss them over, however. But I think those little details add those touchstones of what we can think of, like, okay, well, I'm going to make dinner. I don't get to just say, well, I wave my spatula focus over the stove and now we have tacos, right?
Yeah, it's like maybe
you have to
I
get
carry
ingredients,
it.
you have to prepare them, and doing a little bit of that here and there can just help build so much more investment and just paint such a vivid picture of the world around you, the characters living in it, all that fun stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we're going to end on that because I really like how that was just tied up into a nice bow.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is a delight.
This is awesome. And thank you guys for tuning in. As Dan said, just find what works for you, find what's fun for you, but don't be afraid of embracing those little aspects of role playing because you never know how it can heighten your game. Thanks for coming, guys. Bye. Hey, normally you'd be hearing my voice right now, but it's the season finale, so I figured pulling out the camera. Thank you all so much for tuning into tonight's episode, but more importantly, thank you all for tuning in throughout the season. And thank you even more to my interviewees who decided to take a chance on this weirdo and sit down and have a conversation with me. Nerd Out was born out of those awesome interactions that you have most of the time with strangers, where you see their shirt and you go, hey man, I really like that too. And you get to see that spark in their eye and they get to talk about something they're passionate about. And on the flip side, it was born from seeing those interactions with people who apologize halfway through. And at some point somebody told them that their passion was annoying. And I wanted to create an atmosphere that was really conducive to those just organic conversations that we have.
and to showcase the diversity of these passions that we have. Because in the end, everybody nerds out about something. So, moving on into season 2 that I'll be shooting this weekend at PAX Unplugged. Can't wait to show you guys all these stories. But in the meantime, don't forget, nerd out loud and often. I love you all. Thank you so much.